The 9,424th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is threats to international peace and security. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting: Mr. Dirk, Pohlmann, journalist, and Mr. Jimmy Dore, political commentator. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Mr. Dirk Pohlmann.
Ms. President, distinguished members of the Security Council, thank you for the chance to speak here. I'm Dirk Pohlmann, investigative journalist and documentary filmmaker for 37 years. I've written and directed more than 20 documentaries, mostly about intelligence operations of the Cold War, aired in approximately 30 countries on TV. I'm independent, I'm a freelancer, and I'm not on any payroll. I reported repeatedly about the Nord Stream sabotage and have contacted and interviewed many researchers on this. 1 year after this severe act of terrorism, we know astonishingly little. For example, we don't know how many explosions destroyed the allegedly 4 damaged sites. We have seismic data for only 2 explosions at 0003 and 1704 UTC. We don't know who did it. I omit the Western-sponsored baseless conspiracy theory of Russia as the culprit. I think it is fair to say that the authorities in Germany, Denmark, Sweden, and other Western countries know enough to know that they don't want to know more. The truth would open Pandora's box for NATO. The version pushed in Germany via the media by the state, which itself is completely silent because of the, quote, well-being of the state, which can be translated to national security, and because of the, quote, third-party rule on intelligence cooperation, it was probably an Ukrainian operation using a sailing boat with 6 people on board, 4 divers, but without knowledge of the Ukrainian government. I trust this version as far as I can throw a washing machine. But there is actually new evidence which I want to present here. Professor Emeritus Dr. Ulla Thunander, formerly Peace Research Institute Oslo, wrote to me on request addressing the location, stressing that the location of the sabotage was at a very deep position of the pipeline where 80 meters depth. In some distance to each side, the depth would have been 30 to 40 meters. Why was the deep location picked? Remember this info for later, please. Thunander wrote to me, and I quote him now, the explosives were deployed in the Bornholm Basin at a depth of 75 to 80 meters. Such deep dives require a decompression chamber. The story about a small sailing boat is impossible. It cannot bring the necessary decompression chamber. The depth indicates professional or military divers. Norwegian seismological station NORSA states a magnitude of 2.1 to 2.3 of the explosion, which corresponds to 650 to 900 kilogram of TNT. Geophone Potsdam claimed that the magnitude was higher, 3.1, which would correspond to several tons of TNT. This operation would be impossible to run from a small sailing boat. Each section of the pipeline of steel and concrete is 12 meters long and has a weight of 24 tons. About 250 meters of the pipeline Nord Stream string A and B have been blown away. It was a huge blast run by a state agency. When you do a huge professional operation, you firstly need a cover for the deployment of the bombs. And secondly, you need to disconnect the deployment from the triggering of the bombs. Otherwise, people would easily find out who the perpetrators are. The obvious cover was the Baltops 20T exercise in June 22 with 45 ships from various NATO countries. They exercised mine warfare with divers and unmanned underwater vehicles. US ships like the small aircraft carrier USS Kearsarge, 257 meters, and USS Gunston Hall, 190 meters, were both capable of bringing a midget submarine, which could have been useful for the deployment of explosives at such a depth. A remark by me, the two ships can transport, deploy, and load mini-subs back into the hull on high sea. I go on with Professor Tunanda. One witness as well as Seymour Hersh have both claimed that US Navy divers with deep diving equipment from Panama City, Florida were present. They had nothing to do with the exercise. They had very likely been used to deploy the bombs. Seymour Hersh claims that they had dropped a sonar buoy from a P-8 Poseidon aircraft. The buoy had sent a coded signal that triggered the timers of the bombs. This is an easy and practical way to do it. Seymour Hersh sources, supposedly from the CIA, also told him that the US had used a Norwegian Poseidon to pull the trigger. Americans like plausible deniability, but there's something we have to add. It might have been the US plan, but such an operation did not fit with traditional Norwegian security policy. So the Norwegians at a higher level seem to have backed out, contrary to the information Seymour Hersh got. What happened instead? On 21st of September, a US Poseidon, and everything I quote now is new, flew from Sigonella, Italy, up to the Nordholz Navy Airfield in Germany. That is an airfield from the Naval Aviation in Germany. And flew for 3 nights back and forth over Bornholm, 22nd to 25th September, and then on 26th September, back to Sigonella. It could have easily dropped a sonar buoy over the sea close to Bornholm. If Hersh was right, then the Norwegians were supposed to drop the sonar buoy. The Americans at Sigonella would have to fetch it from Norway. So on 14th September, a US Hercules flew 7 hours up from Sigonella to Andenes, northern Norway, and then back to Sigonella over Keflavik. We have reason to believe that the Hercules fetched something very important in Norway, a specific sonar buoy, and brought it to Sigonella. It also should be noted, this is not from Tunanda, but from me now, that the Norwegians have bought P-8s and they are in the process of training the crews, especially the electronic warfare and anti-submarine warfare crews. So this is a mix of people. It's not on the record in Norway, but it can be used by Norway or it could be used by the United States. That is the background information. 2 hours before the first explosion, at 0003 UTC, a US Poseidon left Keflavik, Iceland, for the waters east of Bornholm. It arrived at Bornholm 1 hour after the first explosion. At the same time of the explosion, strangely enough, exactly the minute when the US Poseidon was southwest of Norway, a US tanker aircraft left US Spangdahlem Air Base in Germany for Poland to refuel the Poseidon, so it would be able to patrol the waters east of Bornholm for the upcoming 4 hours. It turned off its transponder at 0310 UTC and turned it on again 3 hours later, still east of Bornholm. At 7 o'clock, the Poseidon flew over the site of the explosion for the last time, then climbed to an altitude of 10,000 meters and returned to Keflavik. I also asked Dr. Hans-Benjamin Braun, an eminent Swiss physicist with many publications in top journals, who has been teaching as professor at some leading universities, and he stated the following. So far, the official reports all agreed on the fact that the pipelines were destroyed with an explosive charge equivalent to a few hundred kilograms of conventional explosive TNT equivalent. These reports are not only mutually contradictory, but also contradict basic physical considerations, thus invalidating the hypothesis of the use of a conventional explosive. In contrast, several solid pieces of geophysical evidence, namely seismic waveforms, placement of explosives, aerosol cloud after explosion, underwater currents, temperature increase on ocean floor with concomitant reduced biomass production, and gamma ray detection in Poland point towards the use of an explosive charge at least 1,000 times of what has been reported previously. These results have been presented in a detailed report initially submitted to the Swiss government on January 4th, 2023 by Professor Braun and its representation on the United Nations Security Council. Without going into details, I demonstrate here that the hypothesis of the use of a conventional explosive of moderate strength is already invalidated by close inspection of the official reports. In order to appreciate these contradictions, it should be noted that the mathematical relation between seismic magnitude on the Richter scale and explosive charge is a logarithmic one. A magnitude increase by 1 corresponds to a 10-fold increase in seismic amplitude. So if you go from 2 to 3, it's not linear, it's 10 times as much. And for underwater explosions, to a 35-fold increase in explosive mass. The official reports on the magnitude of the larger explosion that destroyed Nord Stream 1 on Swedish territory go back to an original report by Norway's NORSA, as Thunander stated, which reported an event of magnitude 2.1 on the Richter scale. This corresponds to approximately 700 kilograms of TNT equivalent. However, these data were presented without units on the graph. That is very rare. In a scientific publication, no units on the graph. Without units and lacked scientific basis. Despite the serious shortcoming, an explosive change of this magnitude or less has been quoted in the media ever since. This is what we hear all the time, 500 to 900 kilograms. In contrast, the official entry into the seismic geophone database in magnitude 3.1 and thus 35 times larger than the previous estimate, corresponding to roughly 25 tons of TNT equivalent. As a much smaller explosive charge would have been sufficient to destroy the pipeline, this raises considerable doubts about the nature of the explosive charge used. This considerable amount of explosive charge has been placed on Nord Stream 1 at a location such that the elliptically shaped Swedish coastline acted as a focusing mirror for the emitted shockwave. Also, it was placed so that there was a direct and unobstructed connection between the site and the Kaliningrad coast through a submarine canyon. So there's something like a bowl in the ocean with a canyon with a direction to Kaliningrad. If you recall Professor Thunander's question, why the sabotage was done in great depths, such a direct connection would not have been possible a few kilometers up or downstream along the Nord Stream pipeline. The location of the explosion site was designed to generate a shockwave directed at Kaliningrad. My remark probably is a message to the Russian government. Again, Dr. Braun, this effect was missed in the official reports, which were restricted to seismic stations to the west of the explosion site, in the shadow of Bornholm, so to speak. So the readings we have are from in the back of Bornholm and lesser. In fact, a thorough evaluation of several seismic stations around the Baltic yields Richter magnitude 4, suggesting the use of at least 150 tons of TNT. This raises serious concerns about the nature of the explosive charge being used in the attack. These large seismic signals have been attempted to be explained by the thrust of methane gas exiting from the destroyed pipeline. With the reported pressure, the speed of the resulting shock is significantly lower than the speed of sound in water, which is 1.5 kilometers per second. As a result, the exiting methane cannot explain the observed magnitudes in the Baltic Sea. There are reports of technogenic craters of depth 3 to 5 meters depth. Several independent reports have related crater size to explosive weight, including nuclear underwater explosions. Also here, a rough estimate of explosive charge yields at least 20 to 150 tons of TNT, again invalidating the hypothesis of a small amount of conventional explosive. These facts about the explosion that destroyed Nord Stream 1, together with the independent geophysical observations, are inconsistent with the reported use of a conventional explosive of a few hundred kilograms. The observations are rather consistent with an explosive charge of 1 to 4 kilotons TNT equivalent. In an earlier report from December 31, 2022, Dr. Braun elaborated on a total of 7 independent geophysical observations that are at variance with the reported use of a moderate explosive. The quantitative estimate places a strict lower bound on the explosive charge of 150 tons TNT, which is at least 400 times the value of the official reports. The current findings are of high importance as reflected by the statement by one of the reviewers quote, "The scientific results are relevant for current international affairs and warrant urgent reporting," end of quote. In view of the seriousness of the matter, it is important that independent and objective evidence is secured, which requires the authority of the UN Security Council. And absent of action puts humanity at large at risk. Dr. Brown, again, for further details of my analysis, I refer to my recent presentations and my report, which has already been forwarded to the Swiss government and its representation to the UN Security Council on January 4th, 23. Dr. Brown has offered the Security Council to present him in depth analysis in detail and offers it again hereby through me. Now a remark from me. The Baltic seabed is packed with hydrophones. The Western navies can identify every vessel in and on the surface of the Baltic since the late 70s. The propellers create something like a fingerprint. A German TV crew filming a 30-minute report with the allegedly used Andromeda sailing yacht with an ominous soundtrack should have recorded the sound of the motor and the propeller of Andromeda, which has been used allegedly at the sabotage site, and the motor must have been used to keep the ship's position. And then the crew should have asked the NATO navies to check if Andromeda was there at the right time at the site of the explosion. I would also like to remark Soviet pipelines have been a source for Western intelligence operations before. Enrico Mattei, the most successful Italian oil manager and head of INI, was killed in the crash of his private jet in 1962. He was hated by the US mineral oil industry for his immense business success in the North African countries. In a memo to the CIA, they called him, the mineral oil industry, US, called him as, quote, an even greater villain than the Soviet Union when he arranged the up to then biggest business deal in Italy with the USSR, a barter agreement to build pipelines for Italy for Soviet oil. In 1997, it was proven that the crash was not due to bad weather, as told before, as there were metal splinters found in his exhumed bones, the effect of a bomb in the jet. In 1982, the CIA destroyed the Yamal pipeline with malfunctioning ships infiltrated into the USSR in an elaborate intelligence operation. The former Secretary of the Air Force, Thomas Reed, told me in an interview how he witnessed, as a member of the US National Security Council, the message that a 3-kiloton burst was recorded in the USSR. And the CIA official told them that the biggest conventional explosion ever was the result of a CIA operation, not a nuclear warhead of the USSR. It was just one of a string of operations against the Yamal pipeline. When the Social Democratic German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt insisted on the gas pipeline deal in the early 80s to secure cheap Soviet gas for Europe, although Reagan had told him to stop the contract in a one-on-one meeting, Schmidt looking out of the window while Reagan spoke to him, it meant he fell from grace. The conservative Helmut Kohl became the new Chancellor of Germany without an election by an allegedly US-assisted vote of no confidence in Germany. In the parliament. Latest, when it comes to Russian gas, the US has no allies but hostages. On top of that, some hostages suffer from Stockholm syndrome, like the current Swedish and German governments. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Pohlmann for his briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Jimmy Dore.
Greetings, Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council. I'm here to speak today about the attack on the Nord Stream pipeline that took place 1 year ago on September 26, 2022. 4 explosions ruptured the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines that carried natural gas from Russia to Europe. It was the biggest act of industrial sabotage in human history, severing the main artery for energy from Russia to Germany, cheap energy that was critical to maintaining Germany's industrial base. We have heard every cockamamie and ridiculous theory on how this happened. Now, you don't need to be a genius investigative reporter to figure out who is the culprit of the Nord Stream attack. Incredibly, most Western news outlets ignore the fact that the President of the United States, Joe Biden himself, announced on February 9, 2022, that he would in fact attack the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, saying, and I quote, "If Russia invades Ukraine, tanks crossing the border again, there will no longer be a Nord Stream 2 pipeline." We will bring an end to it. I promise you, we will be able to do it. Even with that pre-admission of guilt from the President of the United States, most of the Western press remained baffled as to who could have pulled off the greatest act of eco-terrorism in history. But luckily, we don't have to rely on my interpretation of President Biden's clear threat to attack the pipelines. We actually have Seymour Hersh, a genius investigative reporter with impeccable reputation and credentials, who reported that in June of 2022, United States Navy divers operating under the cover of a widely publicized summer NATO exercise known as Baltops 22 planted the remotely triggered explosives that 3 months later destroyed 3 of the 4 Nord Stream pipelines, according to a source with direct knowledge of the operational planning. And like all criminals, the perpetrators could not contain their elation over committing the crime. Shortly after the attack, many high-ranking U.S. officials could not help but brag about their achievements and expressed multiple times how they were proud of being able to put an end to the pipelines. Undersecretary of State Victoria Nuland said, "I am, and I think the administration is, very gratified to know that Nord Stream 2 is now, as you like to say, a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea." The United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken called it a tremendous opportunity to once and for all remove the dependence on Russian energy. You have to be a paid liar to not acknowledge the hand of the United States in carrying out these attacks. Not only did President Biden declare he would do this, but high-ranking U.S. officials have said similar things for years. We can look to 2014 when former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice stated that over the long run, you simply want to change the structure of energy dependence. You want to depend more on North American energy platforms, which is what this is really all about. An economic war between the West and Russia in order to fill the pockets of rapacious capitalists who actually pull the strings of the U.S. government and dictate foreign policy. So let's pull back and take a look at the context in which this pipeline bombing occurred, shall we? It's all happening under the guise of defending Ukraine from an unprovoked Russian invasion. But of course, that's only true if you start the story of the Ukraine war somewhere near the end of the story instead of the beginning, which would indict Ukraine, the US, and NATO. The US and NATO are to blame, which is why the Western media always leaves the origin of this conflict out of their coverage and leaves most people in the dark with a false version of the cause of the conflict. Most Americans believe that Vladimir Putin woke up one day and decided for no particular reason to invade Ukraine and start a war completely out of the blue. This is what supporters of the Ukraine in this war actually believe, because that's the only narrative they hear from their news media, which is funded by the people who profit off this war, the military-industrial complex, the fossil fuel companies in the West, and of course, Wall Street. To make a crude analogy of the Western media's coverage of the Russian invasion is the following. Let's say Vladimir Putin was standing on a bus stop and there was an old lady standing in the street and a bus was heading straight for her. So Vladimir Putin pushes the old lady out of the way of the oncoming bus and down onto the concrete sidewalk. The Western corporate media would start that story near the end saying, Russian president pushes old lady down onto the concrete. The same goes for the entirety of the Ukraine-Russian war. The Western media starts the story of the war at February 24th, 2022, which is definitely not when this conflict started. They leave out the 2014 coup of the democratically elected Ukraine government orchestrated by the CIA in conjunction with Ukraine Nazis. They leave out the fact that the Russian-speaking ethnic population in the eastern part of Ukraine, known as the Donbass, didn't want to go along with the CIA Nazi coup government. And so the newly coup right-wing Ukraine government started shelling the citizens of the Donbass, via their henchmen, known as the Nazi Azov Battalion, that ended up killing somewhere around 18,000 civilians in the Donbass. They leave out also, there was a peace agreement that was reached to end the shelling by the Ukraine government and the Nazi Azov Battalion, known as the Minsk Accords, because the people who broke that peace agreement was not Russia, but the Ukraine government and the Nazis. They leave out the fact that there was already an overall peaceful way to avoid war and the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of precious Ukrainians, which was recently admitted to by the Secretary General of NATO, who admitted that it was the expansion of NATO onto Russia's border that was the real prevarication, and the US and NATO refused to stop their expansion onto Russia's border. All this amnesia is necessary for the continued aggression and warmongering of the US and NATO to be accepted by the citizens of the United States and Europe. Well, I'm here to cure them of their amnesia and remind them of the true cause of not only the Nord Stream bombing, but of the entire Ukraine war and the destabilization of the Middle East, including Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. The reason for that is the imperialistic lust of the United States empire. The U.S. now has over 800 military bases around the world without being able to cite an actual threat to their sovereignty. The U.S. is now ending its empire the way all empires end, by overextending itself militarily while it starves its own people at home. The real threat is the threat of U.S. economic interests. The U.S. has for decades feared German engineering and capital joining Russia's natural resources and manpower. As elucidated very clearly by the founder of the U.S. intelligence firm Stratford, George Friedman, in his 2010 book, says, quote, Russia does not threaten America's global position, but the mere possibility that it might collaborate with Europe, and particularly Germany, opens up the most significant threat in a decade, a long-term threat that needs to be nipped in the bud. Therefore, maintaining a powerful wedge between Germany and Russia is of overwhelming interest to the United States. For the U.S., Friedman added in 2015, the primordial fear is German technology and German capital, combining with Russian natural resources and Russian manpower to form the only combination that has for centuries scared the hell out of the United States. In this showdown, the U.S. aims to control the line from the Baltics to the Black Sea. Russia, by contrast, must have at least a neutral Ukraine, not a pro-Western Ukraine, because a neutral Ukraine would impede the primordial U.S. goal of a Russian-German fissure. The U.S. has opted for a proxy war instead. The Western governments are silent, even as the U.S. says through anonymous sources that Ukraine is responsible for the Nord Stream attack, but they won't blame them publicly. And so the United States continues to arm Ukraine to the teeth in hopes of extending the war and avoiding peace. The Germans say it's Ukraine, but will not release their official investigation and will not make an announcement. The final obscenity is that the people in the West who claim to be environmentalists and claim to care about climate change and the environment say nothing about the worst release of methane gas in human history, but in fact whose actions reveal they don't actually care about climate change and continue to support this war and its eco-terrorism. In a bizarre twist, even Greta Thunberg traveled to Ukraine to meet with Zelensky after the Nord Stream bombing. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
I thank Ms. Dore for his briefing. I now give the floor to those members of the Security Council who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Госпожа председатель, благодарим Дирка Pohlmann и Джейми Дора за их доклады, которые в очередной раз продемонстрировали Совету Безопасности, что у граждан западных стран тоже возникает огромное количество вопросов к своим правительствам на фоне многочисленных нестыковок продвигаемой Вашингтоном и его союзниками линии в связи с подрывом газопровода «Северный поток» в сентябре 2022 года. Уважаемые коллеги, с момента диверсии в Балтийском море прошел ровно год. Почти столько же прошло с первого заседания Совета на эту тему. В течение последних 12 месяцев мы очень много слышали о том, что осуществляемые Германией, Данией и Швецией национальное расследование вот-вот позволит найти виновников этого преступления. Однако результатов как не было, так и нет. Несмотря на 7 заседаний Совета Безопасности ООН, как открытых, так и закрытых. Вместе с тем в экспертном сообществе появляются все новые и новые свидетельства того, что подрыв Северного потока – дело рук Вашингтона, который пошел на этот возмутительный преступный акт, руководствуясь узкокорыстным стремлением закрепить свое доминирование в Европе, остро нуждающейся в российских энергоресурсах. Сегодняшняя печальная годовщина – хороший повод кратко восстановить хронологию событий. Напомню основные моменты. Уже 28 сентября, сразу после диверсии, Генеральная прокуратура Российской Федерации инициировала возбуждение уголовного дела по статье «Акт международного терроризма». Дания и Швеция уже 29 сентября в своем письме в Совет Безопасности ООН указали, что северные потоки были уничтожены взрывными устройствами. Кажется, это был единственный услышанный нами за все это время конкретный вывод. Однако Генеральная прокуратура Германии начала свое официальное расследование лишь 10 октября. В октябре 2022 года в Берлин, Копенгаген и Стокгольм были направлены послания председателя правительства Российской Федерации Михаила Мишустина о необходимости проведения всестороннего расследования произошедшего с участием представителей российских властей и компании «Газпром». Ответов на них за прошедший год так и не последовало. В ноябре Генеральная прокуратура Российской Федерации направила немецким, датским и шведским компетентным органам запросы об оказании правовой помощи и формировании совместных следственных групп. В ответ мы получили лишь формальные отписки. Члены Совета имели возможность убедиться в этом собственными глазами. В марте мы распространили копии нашей корреспонденции с властями упомянутых стран. На фоне этой недопустимой ситуации Российская Федерация внесла на рассмотрение Совета Безопасности ООН проект резолюции с просьбой Генеральному секретарю ООН представить предложение о создании независимой международной комиссии по расследованию диверсий. Завтра будет ровно полгода с момента голосования по нему. Текст носил абсолютно деполитизированный характер, в нем были учтены все конкретные комментарии и предложения членов Совета, высказанные ими в ходе длившихся в течение целого месяца неформальных консультаций. Однако принят он не был. Напомню, что основным аргументом тех наших коллег, кто воздержался при голосовании, было так называемое полное доверие национальным расследованиям, осуществляемым властями Германии, Дании и Швеции. Что ж, прошло 6 месяцев, однако результатов нет до сих пор. И это несмотря на то, что озабоченность в связи с отсутствием каких-либо вразумительных новостей из Берлина, Копенгагена и Стокгольма на протяжении столь долгого времени выражали не только Россия, Китай и Бразилия, выступившие в марте за международное расследование, но и ряд других членов Совета Безопасности. Более того, проявив явное неуважение к Совету, Германия, Дания и Швеция проигнорировали просьбу выступить на заседании Совета Безопасности ООН 11 июля, ограничившись распространением очередного письма. Причем в нем весьма откровенно допускалось, что у проводимых расследований может и вовсе не быть результатов. Хотелось бы задать нашим коллегам, столь рьяно поддерживающим эти национальные расследования, вопрос. Какой смысл сдерживать коллективные усилия членов Совета, если у самих этих стран возникают сомнения в результативности осуществляемой ими же работы? Все это очень смахивает на имитацию бурной деятельности и попытку лишить членов Совета Безопасности доступа к информации, имеющей прямое отношение к поддержанию международного мира и безопасности. Госпожа председатель, хочу напомнить, что мы говорим не о какой-то хулиганской выходке. Мы говорим о теракте, затронувшем международную трубопроводную инфраструктуру и повлекшем за собой тяжелые экономические и экологические последствия для целого ряда государств. Никто не отрицает, что совершен он был с помощью взрывного устройства. Следовательно, имеются все основания полагать, что он подпадает под действие Международной конвенции о борьбе с бомбовым терроризмом от 15 декабря 1997 года, участниками которой являются и Германия, и Дания, и Швеция. Данный международно-правовой инструмент недвусмысленно фиксирует обязательство его сторон расследовать факты соответствующих преступлений, выдавать или судить преступников, а также оказывать друг другу максимальную помощь в связи с расследованиями, уголовным преследованием или процедурами выдачи. Власти трех упомянутых государств эти обязательства продолжают игнорировать. Слова канцлера ФРГ Олафа Шольца о намерении довести дело до конца на фоне отсутствия содержательной информации разительно с этим самым делом расходятся. Более того, появляется все больше признаков того, что вместо усилий по выявлению обстоятельств произошедшего, мы на самом деле сталкиваемся с попыткой утаить их. Так, в западном медиапространстве нарастает скоординированная кампания по продвижению совершенно нелепых версий произошедшего. Чего только мы не слышали за прошедший год. И что Россия сама взорвала функционирующий в ее интересах газопровод. И что это сделали какие-то туристы на парусной яхте, которые по одной версии действовали чуть ли не по собственной инициативе, без государственной поддержки, а по другой по указке главнокомандующего вооруженными силами Украины Залужного, но в тайне от его непосредственного руководителя президента Зеленского. Еще нелепее выглядят публиковавшиеся в некоторых европейских СМИ сведения о том, что разведслужбы западных государств, в том числе и США, дескать, были в курсе планов украинцев и даже отговаривали последних от их осуществления. Но те все равно сделали по-своему. На примере с отказом от мирного договора с Россией в марте 2022 года мы знаем, что киевские власти не могут пойти наперекор своим западным кураторам по столь серьезному вопросу. Уважаемые коллеги, сложно не заметить того, что объединяет все эти версии. В каждой из них отрицается причастность Вашингтона к совершению данного преступления. И все они начали расти, как грибы после дождя, вскоре после того, как в начале этого года было опубликовано масштабное расследование американского журналиста, лауреата Пулитцеровской премии Сеймура Херша, о чем сегодня уже упоминалось докладчиком. В нем было приведено большое количество фактов, свидетельствующих о том, что взрывчатку на нитках северных потоков установили американские водолазы в ходе учений НАТО «Болтопс» летом 2022 года. Сегодня он, кстати, опубликовал новую порцию материалов в поддержку этой версии. Из них следует, что подрыв тщательно готовился в течение нескольких месяцев. Продумывалось и то, как замести следы после теракта. Рекомендую всем членам Совета внимательно ознакомиться с ее выводами. Все мы также помним, о чем говорилось и сегодня, и слова президента Байдена о том, что США положат конец Северному потоку-2. В ходе пресс-конференции с канцлером ФРГ Шольцем 7 февраля 2002 года. И нескрываемую радость замгоссекретаря Виктории Нуланд в связи с тем, что газопровод теперь, выражаясь ее словами, является грудой металла на морском дне. В ходе слушаний в Сенате США 26 января 2023 года. И благодарность в адрес США за подрыв потока, выраженную в Твиттере бывшим польским министром иностранных дел Радославом Сикорским. Не будем забывать и о том, что некоторые из западных членов Совета, не справившись с эмоциями, на заседаниях прямо указывали на то, что подрыв северных потоков является ответом на действия России на Украине. Такие чистосердечные признания позволили бы завершить это дело без особых проблем даже начинающему следователю. Но поскольку перед Германией, Данией и Швецией поставлена задача выгораживать причастность их заокеанского старшего брата, у тамошних следователей связаны руки и закрыты глаза. Поэтому, как нам поведал тот же Сеймур Херш, по итогам встречи Джо Байдена и Олафа Шольца американским и немецким разведслужбам было поручено придумать альтернативную версию событий и постепенно сливать ее в СМИ. Вот этим они, собственно говоря, сейчас и занимаются. Вот только уж больно неправдоподобные измышления получаются. Да, и утечки о реальных событиях, о реальных обстоятельствах трагедии не облегчают задачу западным сказочникам. Можно, в частности, вспомнить о находящемся в открытом доступе письме статс-секретаря Федерального министерства экономики и защиты климата ФРГ Грайхена в адрес депутата Бундестага от партии «Левые» Настич, датированным 7 октября 2022 года. Из него следует, что власти Германии еще до начала следствия располагали некой полученной разведывательной информацией, обнародование которой, дескать, могло бы нанести ущерб государственным интересам Германии. Интересно, какая такая информация могла бы нанести ущерб, казалось бы, пострадавшей наряду с Россией стране? Как бы то ни было, это еще одно подтверждение того, что правда западных следователей не интересует, она им скорее мешает. Госпожа председатель, итак, что мы имеем на настоящий момент спустя год после теракта? Угрозы высшего руководства США в отношении функционирования трансграничного подводного газопровода. После этого его подрыв в результате акта международного терроризма, повлекший за собой опасные последствия для международного мира и безопасности, экономики, экологии и судоходства в Балтийском море. Откровенное ликование высокопоставленных представителей американского и проамериканского истеблишмента, сопротивление западных стран идеи запуска беспристрастных и инклюзивных международных усилий под эгидой Генерального секретаря ООН, очевидная неэффективность немецкого, шведского и датского национальных расследований. Параллельно нагнетание информационного фона в целях перекладывания ответственности на кого угодно, кроме США, в попытке противопоставить что-либо объективным фактам. В такой ситуации даже клише «выводы делайте сами» говорить не хочется. Если у кого-то и остаются какие-то иллюзии, то сейчас, спустя год, с ними уже, наверное, стоит попрощаться. Госпожа председатель, не сомневаюсь, что сегодня мы снова услышим от западных коллег, что Россия, мол, отвлекает Совет от более серьезных проблем, настаивая на обсуждении теракта в отношении Северных потоков. Их тактика не мудрена и понятна. Тянуть резину сколько получится, в идеале еще год, и 2, и 3, а потом констатировать, что за давностью лет расследование уже невозможно. Рекомендуем им не тратить на это время и силы, все подобные попытки заведомо обречены на провал. Наша страна будет и далее добиваться объективного и досконального установления всех обстоятельств произошедшего с обязательным подключением российских следственных органов и заинтересованных сторон, а также привлечением к ответственности заказчиков и исполнителей данной диверсии. Мы будем использовать для этого все имеющиеся в нашем распоряжении средства, в том числе и на площадке Совета Безопасности. В рамках этой работы наша страна намерена внести на рассмотрение Совета проект заявления председателя на эту тему. В ближайшие дни представим его текст. Считаем, что Совет Безопасности должен четко высказаться в отношении этого теракта и указать на необходимость его объективного расследования и наказания тех, кто его совершил. Рассчитываем на поддержку всех тех, кто понимает, что в противном случае стать жертвой подобной атаки, совершенной опьяненным чувством собственной безнаказанности государства, может любая страна. Совет Безопасности должен направить четкий сигнал о том, что преступления против трансграничной трубопроводной инфраструктуры недопустимы, и избежать ответственности за них не получится. Только это позволит предотвратить их повторение. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank the briefers for their remarks. Madam President, energy is a cornerstone of modern life, and the reliable supply of natural gas is crucial. Given the heightened fragility of the global energy landscape, acts that endanger critical infrastructure pose a significant risk to many. With this backdrop, Japan is acutely alarmed by the incident concerning the Nord Stream pipelines, as well as its long-term environmental implications. Madam President, we are vigilantly following the investigations led by the governments of Germany, Sweden, and Denmark. We have faith that these will be executed with the utmost fairness. We trust that the outcomes of these national investigations be made public in a transparent manner and reported expeditiously to the Security Council. The Council bears the responsibility to address the issues affecting international peace and security. In order to fulfill such a function, the Council needs to have facts before it. Japan looks forward to seeing the result of investigations by the national authorities. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, dear colleagues, I thank the Presidency for holding this meeting on an important pending issue. The explosions in the Nord Stream 1 and 2 gas pipelines caused enormous economic losses, contributed to aggravate international tensions, and heightened geopolitical uncertainty in the region. Any attack to a massive energy infrastructure is bound to have a profound impact on how international actors perceive the security of their own critical assets. It is also disconcerting to witness the insufficient attention paid to the environmental impacts of the explosions. It stands in stark contrast to the readiness of many nations to assign blame when incidents occur in other regions of the globe. It is important and urgent to determine the causes of this incident. Brazil has expressed on numerous occasions its confidence in the investigations conducted by national authorities of Denmark, Germany, and Sweden. We do so again today and reiterate our support for the conduct of the procedures without external interference. At the same time, we believe that the seriousness of the episode, a clear threat to international peace and security, requires transparent and timely disclosure of at least preliminary conclusions of those investigations. Lack of reliable information leaves ample room for speculation and accusations, including those related to the war in Ukraine. It only feeds already very high tensions. We certainly do not need to aggravate them. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Brazil for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Gabon.
Nous nous réunissons une fois de plus aujourd'hui sur la question du sabotage des gazoducs Nord Stream 1 et 2 au large de la mer Baltique les 26 et 27 septembre 2022. Des actes malveillants contre des infrastructures énergétiques qui avaient suscité l'indignation et la condamnation des membres de ce Conseil. L'ampleur des dégâts matériels, des répercussions sur l'environnement découlant des explosions sous-marines, ainsi que des pertes économiques à court terme consécutives aux mesures conservatoires sur la navigation et le survol, mais également des pertes à long terme découlant du caractère inopérant des installations, sont considérables et nourrissent légitimement de grandes attentes pour les conclusions des investigations conduites. Le Conseil de sécurité demeure dans l'attente du rapport de l'enquête conjointe dont chacun est en droit d'attendre qu'elle fasse la lumière sur les véritables circonstances de ces actes ainsi que leurs auteurs. Un an après les faits, le manque d'avancée sur ce dossier contribue à alimenter toutes sortes de suspicions et de spéculations de nature à remettre en cause la volonté des parties à faire aboutir les investigations. À cet égard, mon pays appelle l'ensemble des parties à s'engager dans une dynamique inclusive, transparente et sans politisation. Il va de soi que toute entrave ou opacité sur le déroulement des investigations serait préjudiciable à sa crédibilité et à la confiance dans le contexte actuel. Il est important que la coopération et l'échange de données et informations puissent prévaloir sur toute autre considération en vue de privilégier la manifestation de la vérité. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Gabon for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Gracias, señora Presidente. Escuché con atención a los ponentes. Cuando se conmemora un año desde las explosiones ocurridas en los gasoductos submarinos Nord Stream 1 y 2 en el mar Báltico, y al estar claro que se trataron de actos de sabotaje, deseo reiterar el rechazo de mi delegación. Nada justifica ataques contra infraestructura civil esencial, incluso energética. Lamentamos que estos actos pusieran en riesgo la navegación la navegación segura marítima y aérea. En varias oportunidades hemos deplorado el impacto ambiental que produjo estos actos, que resultaron en una fuente incalculable de contaminación de la vida marina, con posibles consecuencias climáticas, al haber liberado cientos de millones de metros cúbicos de gas a la atmósfera. Más aún, hemos insistido en nuestra preocupación porque actos como este, en medio de una situación geopolítica mundial sumamente compleja, exacerben las tensiones y pueden ser detonantes de consecuencias imprevisibles, por lo que además seguimos llamando a los estados a evitar la especulación y a obrar con la máxima contención. El Ecuador se mantendrá guiado por la información proporcionada en el pasado en este Consejo por la Secretaria General Adjunta Rosemary Di Carlo, quien llamó a que se eviten acciones disruptivas que afecten o puedan inhibir la búsqueda de la verdad. La información proporcionada por Suecia, Alemania y Dinamarca, contenida en el documento S/2023/517, que fue circulado hace poco más de 2 meses, refleja el carácter complejo de las investigaciones nacionales, que involucran aspectos técnicos, científicos y logísticos, entre otros. Deseo, por tanto, reiterar la conveniencia de que las investigaciones en curso sigan avanzando en línea con los principios fundamentales del Estado de Derecho. Muchas gracias.
I thank the representative of Ecuador for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Merci Madame la Présidente. J'ai pris note des remarques de M. Pohlmann et M. Dore. Notre évaluation reste inchangée. Je réitère la préoccupation de la Suisse par les actes de sabotage présumés contre les gazoducs Nord Stream 1 et 2, entraînant des fuites de gaz en septembre dernier. La Suisse condamne tout acte de sabotage contre les infrastructures critiques, y inclut les infrastructures énergétiques. De tels actes peuvent entraîner des conséquences néfastes sur l'approvisionnement de la population, sur l'économie et sur l'environnement. En ce qui concerne les enquêtes menées par des autorités nationales, nous saluons les informations fournies dans la lettre conjointe du Danemark, de l'Allemagne et de la Suède du 10 juillet. Comme indiqué dans cette lettre, les enquêtes nationales respectives continuent d'être menées pour faire la lumière sur les faits. Nous restons dans l'attente de leurs conclusions. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Switzerland for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of China.
主席女士，今天是北溪管道发生爆炸1周年。自事件发生以来，国际社会始终高度关注，包括中国在内的许多安理会成员多次呼吁，要开展客观、公正、专业的调查，尽早查明真相。令人遗憾的是，迄今为止，围绕此事仍然没有一个明确、权威的结果。北溪管道爆炸事关跨国基础设施安全，给全球能源供应、海域生态环境和航运安全带来负面影响。有关国家开展的国别调查已经进行了相当长一段时间了，但迟迟没有结果。时间拖得越久，收集证据和查明真相就越难，外界的质疑和猜测就更多。 调查结果的可信度就越低。我们希望有关国家增强紧迫感，积极回应国际社会关切，切实本着对地区安全发展负责的态度，及时公布调查进展，并确保调查结果客观、公正、权威，经得起历史检验。俄罗斯是北溪管道爆炸事件的主要当事方之一，我们呼吁有关国家积极同俄罗斯沟通合作，而不是简单的加以拒绝。任何企图将调查政治化的做法，只会令人产生怀疑，引发更多猜测。在北溪管道爆炸事件上，国际社会，包括安理会，应避免采取双重标准。我们希望早日查明事件真相，将肇事者绳之以法。希望秘书处提供更多有用信息，安理会继续对此事保持关注。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China for their statement. I give the floor to
猜测，在北溪管道爆炸事件上，国际社会，包括安理会，应避免采取双重标准。我们希望早日查明事件真相，将肇事者绳之以法。希望秘书处提供更多有用信息，安理会继续对此事保持关注。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, Madam President. Malta reiterates its strong condemnation of the possible active sabotage targeting the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines that occurred in September 2022. Such actions pose a serious threat to energy security and regional stability. Our position against any form of disruption to critical energy infrastructure is a clear and long-standing one. The subsequent leaks have also presented a substantial threat to the nations directly involved and to the environment. They have compromised a critical conduit for the transportation of a crucial energy resource. They have exacerbated the challenges faced by developing nations and global energy markets, already strained as a consequence of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. This incident serves as a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities inherent to essential energy infrastructure. On 10 July, Denmark, Germany, and Sweden sent another joint letter to the Security Council regarding the status of ongoing investigations into the explosions. In the same letter, they reiterated their commitment to investigating the sabotage comprehensively. This Council cannot ignore the fact that the nature of these acts is unprecedented. Investigations are complex, and this is something that we should all be able to agree to and acknowledge. Meanwhile, Malta has no reason to believe that they are not being conducted meticulously, in line with the fundamental principles of the rule of law and independent from political interference. We reiterate our full confidence in their impartiality and credibility. Persistent claims that enough time has passed to establish the truth are groundless. Such speculation only creates distrust and suspicion among states. Furthermore, the countries in question have all the necessary means, resources, and expertise to conduct their own investigations. Introducing further investigations at this juncture seriously risks being counterproductive. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of United Kingdom.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to the briefers for their perspectives. Madam President, the international community remains rightfully concerned about the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines. We've repeatedly condemned this attack, and we all want clear answers. That's why we support the national investigations of Germany, Denmark, and Sweden to determine who is responsible. In July, Germany, Denmark, and Sweden offered a detailed update on the progress of their investigations. That update highlighted the unprecedented nature of the sabotage and the subsequent complexity of the investigative processes. We understand these investigations will take time, and we have full confidence in their impartiality and integrity. As we've said before, we do not believe it is a good use of our time for the Security Council to start to prejudge the outcome of these investigations, dictate how they are conducted, or otherwise undermine them. We and fellow Council members should continue to offer our full support to these investigations so that we can establish who was responsible. President, before I finish, let us pause for a moment on the fact that it was Russia who called this meeting. Russia is claiming it is concerned about the destruction of civilian infrastructure, so much so that it seeks to commemorate the anniversary of this attack. Yet we all know that almost every single day of the year is an anniversary of a deliberate Russian attack on civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. We've seen the systematic bombing of Ukrainian energy and port infrastructure. We've seen over 480 Russian attacks on schools and hospitals, and 120 attacks on religious sites. And beyond infrastructure, what of the lives of civilians themselves? At least 9,600 civilians have been killed and 17,500 more injured in Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. So as we listen to Russia today, let us not forget what they are doing, deliberately and as a matter of policy. Let us also not forget the callous disregard Russia showed for civilians and civilian infrastructure in Aleppo, Homs and Damascus, when they vetoed 9 council resolutions aimed at ending the Assad regime's indiscriminate bombing of hospitals and schools. And let us not forget that while Russia repeatedly brings briefers to the Council from the West, who are free to attack Western governments, they systematically lock up anyone who dares to criticise the Russian government position at home. Madam President, Russia's hypocrisy today is nothing new, but it bears repeating. If they are seriously concerned about civilian infrastructure, they must cease their relentless attacks and ensure accountability for the appalling destruction and suffering they have caused. Thank you.
I thank the representative of United Kingdom for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of United Arab Emirates.
Madam President, the United Arab Emirates reaffirms its unreserved condemnation of the acts of sabotage against the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines 1 year ago. Madam President, the consistent and predictable supply of energy is a bedrock of the international order. The need for energy stability and security is something that unites countries around the world, large and small, developed and developing. The UAE, like all countries, relies upon the safety of transboundary energy infrastructure. Threats to such infrastructure are a matter of international peace and security and have rightfully been addressed by this Council. In Resolution 2341, the Security Council highlighted increasing cross-border critical infrastructure interdependencies, including for the generation, transmission, and distribution of energy. The Council further emphasized that protecting critical infrastructure demands cooperation across borders with governmental authorities, foreign partners, and private sector owners and operators of such infrastructure. Madam President, sabotage against transboundary energy infrastructure is a grave threat to international energy security. When such acts occur, it is vital that competent national authorities investigate. Investigations should be thorough and rigorously fact-based. We note the ongoing investigations by relevant national authorities into the September 22 acts of sabotage. The UAE welcomes the 21 February and 10 July 2023 joint letters from Denmark, Germany, and Sweden to the Security Council, which provided information about their respective investigations. We encourage further updates as well as the expeditious conclusion of the ongoing investigations. We also urge transparency in sharing the findings of national investigations with relevant actors as appropriate. We continue to emphasize the value and importance of international coordination and cooperation in such investigations, and in this regard, we encourage increased cooperation with the pipeline operators who have legitimate equities at stake in the ongoing investigations. The UAE's own national experience demonstrates the usefulness of cooperation and information sharing in such situations. Madam President, undoubtedly, all members of this Council share an interest in preventing acts of sabotage against transboundary energy infrastructure. Such acts must never be tolerated. We eagerly await the conclusion of the investigations into the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipeline explosions, the determination of what transpired, and the identification of those responsible so that they may be held to account. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of United Arab Emirates for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Madam President, Mozambique extends our thanks to the briefers, Mr. Dirk Pohlmann and Mr. Jimmy Dore, for their important insights on the topic before the Council. In that connection, we wish to recall that during Mozambique's Council presidency in March this year, we were told that an attempt was being made to establish an independent investigation under the auspices of the Secretary General. We then learned that it was premature to call for an international investigation. The idea was to avoid interference with the national investigations underway. At the time, Mozambique did underline that such investigations could not be endless. We therefore expressed our support for the speedy conclusion of an objective, impartial, and professional inquiry. Today, despite the prevailing belief that this was indeed an act of sabotage and that a serious violation of international law had taken place, we are not closer to ascertain the truth. Mozambique does not condone with a deliberate destruction and weaponization of critical and transnational infrastructures such as the Nord Stream pipeline. We are still committed to allow ongoing investigations into the incident conducted by the authorities in the three national jurisdictions, namely those of Germany, Sweden, and Denmark, to come to a conclusion. We hold this view guided by Security Council Resolution 2341 of 2017 that aims to protect critical infrastructures of such attacks. Madam President, there is a pressing and founded urgency in bringing the issue to the clarity of justice. We need to guarantee that the trust we hold in our collective mechanism is not eroded, and our faith in the collective security system designed by the Charter is strengthened at all times and circumstances. Let us not forget the consequences of impunity. It not only emboldens those who perpetrate such acts, but also weakens the very foundation of international cooperation. As the primary organ responsible for international peace and security, it is legitimate that the Security Council be kept abreast of the results of the tri-national investigations. Mozambique strongly encourages the speedy conclusion of objective, impartial, and professional investigations into this act that appears to be contrary to international law. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Mozambique for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of United States.
Thank you, Madam President. We regret the Russian mission continues to call repetitive meetings on this topic, despite the number of other pressing matters on the Council's agenda. The United States reiterates its concern regarding the sabotage of Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines that took place in September 2022. Out of respect for this Council's time, I will keep my intervention brief and refer you to our prior statements on this matter. The United States maintains confidence in the ongoing investigations into the facts of what happened, led by the governments of Denmark, Germany, and Sweden. The attacks took place in Denmark and Sweden's maritime zones, and these governments are conducting thorough and impartial investigations. Russia has repeatedly claimed it seeks an impartial investigation, despite its own premature attempts to place the blame on certain countries. It is no surprise it selectively promotes narratives in this Council that comport with its preordained conclusions while dismissing alternative views. Any country with such an incident within its territory would expect to first conduct its own investigation. This Council should disregard accusations and speculation and allow Denmark, Germany, and Sweden to conclude their work. Disingenuous statements from Russia feigning concern are intended to undermine ongoing investigations in an attempt to prejudice their results. And I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Madame la Présidente, la France avait clairement exprimé sa préoccupation lorsqu'il y a un an, des explosions sous-marines avaient frappé les gazoducs Nord Stream. Nous avions pris au sérieux les informations qui indiquaient que ces explosions étaient le résultat d'un acte délibéré de sabotage. Notre position n'a pas varié. Il s'agit de faits graves qui appellent des enquêtes approfondies. Cependant, on ne peut que s'interroger sur les motifs qui amènent la Russie à demander pour la 4e fois une réunion du Conseil de sécurité sur ce sujet. Depuis notre dernière réunion au mois de juillet, aucun élément nouveau, crédible et sérieux n'est apparu qui justifie un nouveau débat sur cette question. Pendant ce temps, pendant que la Russie montre tant de préoccupations au sujet des atteintes portées à une infrastructure européenne, elle continue d'infliger des destructions quotidiennes massives aux infrastructures civiles ukrainiennes, centrales électriques, hôpitaux, écoles. L'organisation de cette nouvelle réunion ne semble donc obéir à aucune nécessité, sinon au besoin pour la Russie de détourner l'attention de ce Conseil et d'alimenter des spéculations quant aux responsabilités dans le sabotage de ces gazoducs. Pour établir la vérité sur cette affaire, des enquêtes ont été diligentées par les autorités compétentes allemandes, danoises et suédoises. Comme nous l'avons déjà souligné, nous n'avons aucune raison de douter de leur sérieux et de leur impartialité. Compte tenu de la gravité et de la complexité des faits dont il est question, nous comprenons que les enquêtes en cours nécessitent du temps et des vérifications approfondies. Nous souhaitons que ces enquêtes se poursuivent et parviennent à leurs conclusions hors de toute interférence politique. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Ghana.
I thank you, Madam President. We have listened closely to the information provided by the briefers and note a common interest in unraveling the facts surrounding the sabotage of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 gas pipelines. The successive damage to the 2 Nord Stream gas pipelines at a time when the global energy crisis was already on the rise shocked the conscience of the international community into a renewed awareness of the strategic linkages between critical infrastructure and security, economic stability, and sustainable development of societies. The depravity of the actions highlighted the importance of concerted global efforts to put in place preemptive as well as mitigating measures against such actions. The incident, in our view, reflects a disregard for the inherent rights of the populations that depend on the energy installations and remains unacceptable by all standards. We reiterate the necessity for states to uphold their responsibilities established under international law and reaffirmed by the decisions of the Security Council for the protection of critical infrastructure, especially of a transboundary nature. It is necessary to forestall future occurrences as damage or destruction caused to critical infrastructure in one sector, be it energy, water, communication, cybersecurity, or transportation, often result in extensive and rippling consequences on other sectors and populations, creating situations of instability and instigating humanitarian crisis. We support the sustained interest of the Council in helping unravel the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines and urge the differences in the views held by Council members on the establishment of an international investigative mechanism should not distract from the unified position expressed against the sabotage of the pipelines in previous meetings of the Council. Madam President, as the Council revisits the issue on the one-year mark of the incident, Ghana would like to reiterate the following 4 points. First, we continue to believe that establishing the facts of such heinous actions is necessary to ensure accountability on the part of the perpetrators and send a strong message against the deliberate destruction of critical infrastructure anywhere. It is in this regard that we accord importance to the ongoing national investigations by the concerned countries of Denmark, Germany, and Sweden, and urge support for their efforts aimed at uncovering the facts beyond the initial establishment of the incident being a sabotage. We further believe that the outcomes of the national investigations would be instructive for the future actions of the Security Council on the matter. Second, we reiterate our appeal to all parties to work in a collaborative manner and in good faith consistent with the provisions of the Security Council Resolution 2341 of 2017. We are of the view that the sharing and exchange of information, technology, expertise, and other relevant resources between and among the countries, as well as the Russian operators, would contribute immensely to ensuring coherent outcomes and the early conclusion of the investigative processes. Third, to address the persisting problem of speculations and accusatory rhetoric, which only fuel the existing geopolitical tensions, we urge the parties to work in a more open and transparent manner. While acknowledging that some information may be sensitive to the national security of the concerned countries, we encourage the provision of regular updates on the status of the investigations to bolster international confidence in the national processes. Fourth and finally, we reiterate our previous submission regarding the necessity of a time frame for concluding the national investigations and presenting the outcomes to appropriate international institutions, including the Security Council, for necessary follow-up actions. I thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the representative of Ghana for their statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as representative of Albania. Colleagues, there have been several meetings on this issue. The same narrative and the same positions have been repeated once more today for the very simple reason that there is nothing new on the matter. Many briefers of different profiles have tried to explain what they don't know and what we still don't know. Our position has been very clear from the beginning and remains the same. We have been and are deeply concerned by an apparent act of sabotage on the pipelines Nord Stream 1 and 2 in the exclusive economic zones of Denmark and Sweden in the Baltic Sea. Such acts are unacceptable. We reiterate our full support for the investigations initiated by the national authorities of Denmark, Germany, and Sweden to determine the origin of the damage and the possible perpetrators. We understand that the investigation is underway, and we have full confidence in its objectiveness. Such investigations processes are complex, delicate, and need time. The 3 countries that are carrying the investigation have strong judicial institutions and unquestionable records of the rule of law. In concluding, we would like to stress that we should be patient and wait for the ongoing investigation's conclusions. I thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.